The rain of ticks began not even 5 minutes after Mass was concluded. The sky had looked fouler than usual all day. Clouds like the swollen corpses of sheep rotting in a flooded pasture seethed as if maggots were writhing beneath their hide. Somewhere beyond the trench-scarred wasteland to the south, the garrison at Lindisfarne Crossroads was still burning a week after it had fallen to the heretics, staining the eternal cloud cover with smoke poisoned by radioactivity and demonic corruption. Every day since, at both morning and evening services, the Loris Company's chaplains and doctrinal officers had taken turns encouraging the dispirited troops by sermonizing on the glories of martyrdom and flogging any doughboy who did not display proper enthusiasm at the prospect. As the troops knelt in the mud around the company's relic, a Mark II Seraphim shell purportedly blessed by St. Rensselaer himself after a third reoccupation of the Holy City, they kept surreptitiously glancing at the sky, waiting for something horrid to come shitting down on them from above. As they were trudging back to their bivouacs, the horror began. At first, the men thought the white nuggets bouncing off their helmets and rolling down the sides of tents were hailstones, until the nuggets unfolded wire-thin legs and began scampering for any patch of exposed flesh. The fat ticks popped like blisters as the soldiers slapped at them and cursed. The soldiers ducked into their tents, stripped off their greatcoats and uniforms, and commenced to pick the bugs off each other. They heated their blades of their bayonets and scalded the ticks into releasing their mandibles, where they'd burrowed into the soldiers' grimy flesh. But of course, they missed some. Thousands and thousands of the pests had fallen on the trenches, even after the company exorcists had come through to hose everything down with holy water. Ticks found their way beneath long johns, into boots, under helmets, and there they feasted. The ticks ballooned. The soft hide of their distended abdomens split, the wounds forming demonic sigils. Soon, the flesh they battened onto began to swell, as well as the venomous gospel delivered by the parasites spread the message of the beast. Despite the fate drummed into them from birth, the men were willing converts. The veterans who'd recently seen action at Mecratrig Advance and the defense of Araboth found absolution from the awful dreams that mangled their sleep. The new boys fled from the constant dread of facing down demonic legions that had left them shaking and pale ever since they got off the trains and beheld the endless trenchscape smoking from horizon to horizon. The gospel of the beast offered them escape into animalistic oblivion, into a state of raw instinct devoid of any thought beyond the simple urges of sex and hunger. Infinite hunger. They tore off their clothing as their skins split open, the meat beneath free to express itself in any form. Bare muscle and rabid organs grew new mouths, new teeth, new tongues. Teeth to crack bone and tongues to lick the marrow out. The new disciples of the beast fell upon any who resisted the gospel of blood and hunger. The trenches roared with gunfire and hunting howls as the converts rampaged, celebrating their freedom as, in the distance, obscured by smoke, the larvae of their new god, like rivers of violent flesh, howled mindlessly into the night. A cloying fog of incense hung beneath the frescoed dome of the Paladin's arming chamber. Monks crowded the galleries, chanting prayers while they monitored the screeds of data being spit out by gilded autoscribes. On the floor, technicians clad in sanctified bodysuits impermeable to sin hustled about their machines, lighting candles, refilling tanks of alchemical reagents, tweaking knobs and faders. When the huge doors to the Paladin's adjoining cell opened, silence fell, and everyone in the arming chamber sank to their knees in reverent adoration. Many wept. The unmistakable ethereal scent of angels overpowered the odors of frankincense and ozone. The Paladin entered, head bowed, hands folded in prayer. The gigantic man was naked, and all in attendance averted their eyes from the radiance of holiness reflecting from his scarred skin. The faceplates of the technicians darkened as the glass polarized. They rose to their feet and set about their tasks. The Paladin took up position in the center of the room and knelt on the mosaic of the militant Christ the Lion. First, the technicians bathed him in holy water and anointed him in conductive oils. They swabbed out his input jacks with squares of virginal cotton and tested their throughput with crucifixes. Once all were satisfied, they logged their readings and called for the Paladin's armor to be brought in. Doors opened and blinded gelded serfs, themselves clad in insulated suits, wheeled out carts upon which the various pieces of the Paladin's armor were arrayed. The plates had been cleansed, fumigated, and sanctified multiple times, but not even the sturdiest alloys and plastics could long resist the corrosive energies of the pit. The ornate armor was terribly rusted, and some pieces were slated to be reforged. But until the Holy City was liberated, there was no way to acquire any more of the Golgothic techites used in the machining process. Ultimately, though, the armor was just the second line of defense. The Paladin's own Christ-derived body and unshakable faith were what truly protected him on his one-man crusades into perdition. While the technicians were connecting the plates of armor to the Paladin's neurologics and mounting them on his implanted undercarriage, a tall screen was wheeled over to the warrior, and the three-dimensional projection of a cardinal general dressed in the red and black chasuble of a high exorcist flickered to life. He spoke. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Council of Saints, in conjunction with the Synod of Strategic Prophecy, has charged you to descend unto the Third Circle this day, to seek out and destroy the demon Major Choronzon, Lord Mechanic of the Goethic Forge, under Archduke Paimon. It shall be done, the Paladin replied, in a soft, almost boyish voice. The Cardinal General's icon vanished. Once the Paladin's armor was sealed and pressurized, its systems tested and cleared for operation, the attending technicians once again knelt for a final prayer. The Paladin took up his shield and sword, while everyone else filed out of the chamber. Once all were gone, the black door in the far wall painfully cranked open. A puff of infernal energies leaked into the room like a shimmer of heat, making the Paladin's armor sizzle faintly. Slowly, with all the ponderous weight of a tank grinding into motion, the Paladin crossed the floor and entered the airlock. The black door ground shut behind him and sealed. Vents in the walls screamed and bled as infernal atmosphere replaced material air. His armor steamed. Finally, the opposite door yawned open, and the Paladin began his descent into the raving blackness of hell. First came the Cancer Angels, dropping from the clouds and unfurling their tumorous wings to soar clumsily over the trenches, absorbing bullets and flak until they burst and rained down unholy spirochetes and pus. The soldiers' prayers quickly changed from hymns of holy defiance to pleas for deliverance, as their flesh bubbled with afflictions, their bodies becoming breeding grounds for a wonderful panoply of plagues. As they fell and seethed with rot, their corpses bloomed into parasitic hounds that loped towards the retreating front lines, terrifying in their silence. Then came the Plague Knights in their squeaking, clanking, stinking armor. Bullets spanged off the rusted plates, holes punched through the metal, bled sewage ripe with fermented illness, while the explosive armor-piercing rounds of sniper priests blew off limbs. The silent figures didn't even stumble. Trench pilgrims ploughed into their lines with bayonets slathered in holy oils, but the knights' huge, rotten claymores hacked open their blessed armor and sowed 1,000 varieties of vermin in their meat. Behind them came hordes of resurrected corpses, some sawing out giddy dirges on instruments they'd once played to pass the dreadful hours waiting for whatever horrors hell was now going to throw at them. None spoke or sang, even those that still had tongues. They praised the putrefactors with the miasmas leaking from their wounds, the maggots spilling from metastatic wounds. Shells fired from artillery miles distant exploded among their ranks, pulping hundreds, and swats of napalm dropped from martyr bombers incinerated thousands. But not even fire could cleanse the pandemic soaked deep into the earth that not even the radiation from hallowed neutron bombs could sterilize. As the battle waned, a procession of exhibitors crowned with ticks came tramping through the feculent mire, making way for a lord of tumors and his wheezing retinue. What ground was not already infected was sprinkled with pus from his gurgling masses. A fog of engineered bacteria rose up from the boiling point, spreading a stench that not even a mindless acolyte of the beast could stomach. The dead men, animated by demonic pestilence, began to claw at the walls of the trenches, pulling down the filthy mud, patting it down into a flat square paved with their own bones. More lords came forth to surround the makeshift stage, anointing it with their foulness. Led by torch-bearing corpses, a squad of choristers came forth. Without a word, they took their places. With dull knives, they sawed through their necks, decapitating themselves in full view of the Lord of Hosts above. Their plague-thickened blood crawled up from the rough stumps to form blasphemous sigils that rippled in the air like heat with the fury of their affront. As the choristers offered down their shriveled souls to hell, a brace of naked witches, their skin whitened with chalk made up of ground bones, formed a circle in their midst. Now came a sound, a shriek like incoming shells, or a cage full of damned souls screaming, and the familiar wet pops and cracks of flesh transforming. The witches' bodies flowered, bowels spilling out to become tentacles, bones locking them together. The air tore open, and more flesh emerged, sucked up from the deepest pit of hell. Miles distant, in their observation posts, horrified spotters fell to the ground, their brains pierced by the side of what was forming, as if their binoculars had become pistol barrels. With a complicated scream that shredded reality and blew the grinning lords and choristers into clouds of flies, the horned and howling first apostle rose up like a mushroom cloud of foulness to preach its caustic sermons to the poisoned wasteland. After the monastery of St. Vindictus fell to the Black Grail's contagious doctrines, and the undead converts marched forth to bolster the siege of New Antioch, the Church of the Metamorphosis came scuttling in to wrap the shattered towers and the bomb-broken walls in mud and saliva and claim the monastery for their order. Soon the fanes and hallways echoed with new chants, the buzzing, clicking, clacking, squelching mantras of the insectoid monastics. A portable doorway was brought all the way from their home monasteries in the inverted mountains of hell and erected in the desecrated cathedral, and there the brothers and sisters gathered to contemplate the sights that churn eternally in the world beyond. A newly reborn acolyte, still wearing tatters of the human skin he'd shed when the maggots of communion reshaped his inner flesh, comes clicking into the scriptorium where many of his brothers and sister acolytes are penning propaganda to distribute through the heretical provinces. At an empty desk, he dips his finger-like mandibles in ink and proceeds to write a screed based on the signs he'd just beheld beyond the doorway. Signs that became symbols on parchment made from the hides of willing sacrifices. Symbols that will worm into the brains of any readers, and there lay the seeds of transformation. In their shrines dug into the rock below the monastery, sisters of the transcendent chrysalid are interrogating a captured general from one of the penitent legions recently swarmed in the trenches outside New Antioch. The man has bitten out his own tongue to thwart their aims, but the sisters have no need for speech. They can't even hear through their translucent calls. They hoist him upside down and carefully, slowly crack open his skull. They are expert haruspices, Carefully jotting down the intel about the city's defenses, they read from the convolutions of his brain. Elsewhere in the monastery, the tiny abbot bows before the gigantic Mother Superior, and the heaps of eggs she continuously excretes from her birthing sacs. All day and all night he supervises the droning postulants that spend their brief lives fertilizing the eggs by inscribing horrible sigils into their soft shells. The eggs are packaged in great cases and sent to the captured airfield south of the monastery, where they are taken up by possessed pigeons. The birds will drop the eggs all over New Antioch. Maybe 1 in 1,000 of the maggots that burst from them will find a willing host, but one is all that's needed. Through that person's eyes, the scryers in their bulging cocoons will search the city for weaknesses. All these activities, however, are just chores the monastics perform for the other orders of hell in return for their continued solitude. They are not a militant order. They were formed to be scrutineers of the artifacts they call the doorway. They are dedicated to studying the beyond, and there is no finer fate than to be hollowed out by the things they see, their souls twisted into incomprehensible shapes no material shell can contain. The mindless husks of the transcended are enshrined in their monastery's libraries, where their sanctioned chitin is consumed bit by bit by pupil novices to help them continue their metamorphosis. The other orders often mock the Church of the Metamorphosis as navel-gazers and hair-splitters, but their role in the Great War is vital to Hell's progress. What others perceived as endless noise and idle chatter is knowledge in flux. Knowledge that, once it's picked apart into its tiniest pieces, orchestrates the entire war. And piece by minuscule piece, prepares the world for the day when the doorway opens. An hypothesis comes blasting forth to illuminate everything in its absolute absence of sense. We remained cowering in a trench when the trumpet sounded in the oppressive, lead-lined sky. We furtively glanced out of the corner of our eyes, having learned long ago not to look at such things directly, and we saw it all the same. The angel stepped down from the sky in a burning catastrophe of light, and it spoke words like thunder. The words were vast and inscrutable, like glimpsing only a fragment of some titanic buried machine and trying to understand its ancient purpose. Our minds broke upon the surface of those words, leaving us gasping for air. We could not endure such relentless purity. I stared dumbfounded at my friends who had cast themselves into the mud. They crawled like worms, and they uttered the most desolate sounds. One beat his face against a wooden post until it was a slick, red cavity bristling with broken teeth, and the other, shrieking, clutched his service pistol and shot himself again and again. I pulled myself out of the trench, scrabbling over the sandbags and crosses, and the words of the angel filled my head with a buzzing pressure that made my eyes bulge from their sockets. I fell to my knees, and I made obeisance, and as I stared into the blazing, dominating light, I could not even feel my head catch fire.